So recently, I've had a fascination with the ocean and just watching the way that the water moves and crashes on the beach and around the rocks. And it began when I heard the song Oceans by the band Hillsong. And I started noticing how much ocean imagery is in the Bible and used in our contemporary Christian music. So a few months ago, when I came home from school for the summer, my family went out to the beach. And I sat there staring at the waves for a long time. And there was this huge rock just off the shore, and the waves were hitting it and crashing all around because of the wind. And the wind was so strong that it was making me go wherever it was blowing. And it looked, with the way that the waves were crashing and the way that the wind was blowing me, it looked like the rock in the ocean was moving, which could not be possible because it was enormous, it was not movable. And the waves would momentarily obstruct my view of sections of the rock. Or between waves, places unseen would be revealed quickly before being hidden beneath the water again. And when I was sitting there, the story that we just heard of Peter became very clear to me. Peter amazes me. He had such trust in Jesus that he could step out of the boat onto something so unfamiliar without any hesitation. And he trusted his relationship with Jesus enough to know that he would be kept safe and that he would be taken care of. And he makes it seem incredibly easy. But then he gets this reality check. Before, when he was in the boat, he may have been looking right at Jesus as he was walking towards them, trying to figure out if it was him or someone else. And when he had no doubt that it was Jesus and he was called out of the boat, he looked down at his feet as he took a step onto the water and back up in amazement as he stood upon it. And then he started looking around and he took in the bigger picture. He saw the vastness of the sea and he saw the wind making waves underneath his feet, and it became distracting. And that distraction turned into worry, and that worry turned into doubt. And when I first read this story, I looked at Peter like he was being ridiculous. It was like I was one of the disciples in the boat yelling out at him, "Peter, nothing changed. Just because of some wind, you're going to let yourself sink? Just keep walking." But if Peter had just kept looking at Jesus, it would have been a story of trust and of strength. But if the story stopped like that, we wouldn't understand the importance of what happened when Jesus quickly came to Peter's rescue. I tend to be a lot like Peter in that I am easily distracted. I could be completely dedicated to something and then minutes later instantly doubt everything. For example, I spent a week as a counselor at Northern California Flute Camp. And basically for 10 days I was teaching, working, performing, and practicing along with 44 other students. That first night in my performance, I felt very good about it. It went amazing. One of my best performances yet. My teachers were impressed and they were completely supportive. And then a few nights later, one of the other counselors performed a piece that was much more difficult than the one that I had performed. He had an amazing sound, and I know that he learns things so quickly. And I found myself wondering if maybe I shouldn't be striving to be a musician, even though literally 2 days before I was completely sure of myself. For me, it only takes a breeze to distract me. But Peter knew exactly what to do when the wind hit. He didn't hesitate to turn back to Jesus and call out to him. He didn't try to grasp back onto the boat, and he didn't try to swim to safety, but instead he remembered who called him out of the boat in the first place. Jesus was standing right there, ready to rescue him, and all Peter had to do was call out his name. In this entire passage, the word that stands out to me the most is immediately. It says that Jesus immediately reached out for Peter. This implies that Jesus was not only already close, but that he wasn't about to wait for a confession or an apology before he helped Peter. That isn't how Jesus works. Our relationship with him isn't based on how many times we apologize after we fail, but on our act of turning back to him when we do. When Peter called out for Jesus to save him, He may as well have said, "Jesus, I trust your power. I trust you to get me out. Please help me because I know that you're the only one who can." God isn't sitting up on his throne waiting for us to throw ourselves at his feet in guilt, in confession of our humanity. He's waiting near to us, knowing that we will inevitably become distracted again. So instead of scolding us when we fall down and lose focus, he asks us a question. Why do you doubt? Jesus wasn't irritated with Peter. He's not irritated with any of us when this happens. He's desperately saying, why did you doubt? Why do you ever doubt? Things are perfect when you're focused on me. And if only you could keep looking at me instead of the water and the wind, you will be fine. And I imagine that when Jesus is speaking to Peter, rather than impatience in his voice, is sadness. You of little faith, you were so close. Why did you doubt my strength over the wind and the waves? You'd already done the hardest part by stepping out of the boat in the first place. Why do you let the little things take you away from me? And when I hear Jesus asking me that question, I'm dumbfounded and I'm speechless. How could I possibly respond to that? I have no defense for myself. There's no explanation. For us, most of the time when our faith falters and we experience doubt, it's in the confines of our heart or in our private lives. But Peter just failed in front of all of his closest friends and his Lord. He must have felt the spotlight on him as everyone had been watching to see what would happen, to see what Jesus would do. I half expected there to be comments of disapproval directed at Peter, maybe even comparing themselves, saying that they would never doubt like that. That would never happen to them. But instead, he hears gasps of amazement and exclamations of praise, saying, "Did you see that? He has to be the Son of God. He just saved Peter." And maybe Peter is still speechless from Jesus' question. Or maybe he's confused that no one is paying attention to him after his public display of doubt. Either way, it's clear that Jesus' strength in the situation, his power over the sea, and his willingness to save Peter without a second thought all overshadowed Peter's shortcoming. 2 Corinthians chapter 12, verse 9 says this, "But he said to me, 'My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore I will boast all the more gladly about my weaknesses, so that Christ's power may rest on me.'" We have this terrible habit of hiding our struggles. I personally have a tendency to pull away from the people who are most supportive of me when I feel like what I may be doing might disappoint them. And maybe that's because we've been told that when we don't do things right, that it's humiliating to us. And we need to pull it together to fix ourselves before we can be accepted. But in God's kingdom, it's the opposite. When we're hiding our struggles, consequently, we end up hiding the outcome and the growth from that situation. It's stifling to the knowledge of God's power if we keep covering up what he can do. If Jesus had walked on water and stepped into the boat, that would have been a miracle in itself. But it's his response to Peter's weakness that brings the disciples to their knees in worship. If the disciples hadn't witnessed Jesus lifting Peter out of the water, they would have missed out on the evidence of Jesus' power and willingness to save. When we hide what God is doing in our lives, we aren't allowing his power to become evident to others around us. It's through our illnesses that he can demonstrate healing. It's through our distraction that he is able to show his patience. It's through our selfishness that he can show us what it is to be selfless. It's through our sinful hearts that he is able to show unrestricted and unconditional love. Without our shortcomings, we wouldn't know all that God has for us and all of his character that we get to witness through Jesus' example and interactions with us. He is always showing us grace. But how could anyone know that if we don't let it show? How could anyone know of God's unconditional love unless we have the willingness to admit our own faults that could have stood in his way? This is what it means for God's power to be made perfect in weakness. It was always there, but we may not see it until it becomes apparent in our lives. And that is when we get to be in awe of who God is. It's through that demonstration that we know why God is completely deserving of our praise and adoration, just like the disciples that night. It's easy for people to look at Christians and say that we're hypocrites, because we're always messing up. We say one thing and we do something completely different. But the difference is that we can show them that we're not satisfied to sit back and let ourselves fall victim to that life, but instead keep calling on Jesus. We can see through Christ's example that there's more to this life, and we will continue to call on him for support through the winds and the waves. Instead of letting them talk about our failings, we should have them talking about how we never give up trying to be better day after day. It can be a lot easier to be discouraged. It's rough knowing that no matter how many times we step out of the boat, we're still going to have to call on Jesus to keep us from sinking. And sometimes, looking forward, it can be easy to give up and wonder what the point is in doing this over and over again. Sometimes we have to admit to everyone that we were wrong. But there is glory to God when we admit to everyone and continuously call on his name, showing that his greatness we cannot match. Our transformation will have people saying, "This has to be from God. Who else could have done this?" So it's our job to keep stepping boldly onto the unknown waters when Jesus calls us, even if it means failing publicly. It's our job not to be afraid to sink, but instead to know that we're susceptible to distraction, and all we have to do is shamelessly call out to Jesus again, reminding ourselves that it's just another demonstration of God's power made perfect in our weakness. When Jesus asks me why I doubt him when I'm there speechless, I interpret it differently, saying to myself, "Hannah, how could you do that again? You're always letting that little breeze distract you so easily." But I've come to realize that it's my own voice saying that to me. Jesus would never say that. He's the one picking me up out of the water, handing me a towel, and asking me to become aware of what is getting in the way, so that I understand, not so that I feel guilty for it. But I tend to allow that guilt over my shortcomings to get to me, and they become the waves underneath my feet. I heard this song in chapel last year. It's called "Running in Circles," and I've come back to it every time I feel this way. It says this: "I'm so forgetful, but you always remind me that you're the only one who brings me peace. So I come, Lord. I come to tell you I love you, to tell you I need you, to tell you there's no better place for me than in your arms, to tell you I'm sorry for running in circles, for keeping my focus on the waves and not on your face. You're the only one who brings me peace in the storm." So when I was sitting on the beach watching that rock, I knew it wasn't moving. I knew that nothing was changing, but the waves made it seem different every second. Christ is that rock. He's the rock that is always there, but sometimes in the depth of his character and his unlimited grace are hidden because the storm and the waves around us obstruct our view of him. The wind may move us around. Each wave is going to be different than the last, and the sand doesn't stay in one place for very long. But no matter the waves, no matter how high the tide or how strong the wind, he's the one thing that cannot move and will never lose patience with us in the midst of our distractions. He's there to lift us up immediately when we call on his name again and again.